like most of Atlanta, but also in particular Sandy Springs, one of the hottest topics one could talk about in Sandy Springs
Sure.
would be around traffic, right?
Hi guys, Matt LaMarsh here with Keller Williams First Atlanta. Hope you guys are doing well. If you have a business or a nonprofit that you'd like to see featured here, please feel free to give me a call at 678-687-4397 or shoot me an email to matt@mattlamarsh.com. Thanks so much.
Hi, my name is Brett Jacobsen. I'm the head of school at Mount Vernon Presbyterian School. This is my 10th year at Mount Vernon, and we have just lived through a very transformative period over the last decade. We've probably, in terms of size of school in the greater metro Atlanta area, and certainly here in Sandy Springs, we've probably moved 15 points in terms of size of school. So probably around 30th in size 10 years ago. We're about 15th, and over the next several years, we'll probably move into the top 10 and then kind of settle out there because while we certainly want to continue to grow and there's certainly demand for the school, we have some reasonable growth periods that where we sort of want to settle into. And so it really shows that this part of the city is growing and there's a demand for certain types of schools, and certainly we are in a great location in order to provide that need and service to families here in Sandy Springs and well beyond that.
Cool, very good. So tell us a little more about you and your background in education and kind of how you came here.
So I grew up in Texas. I grew up in the western part of Texas, a small town of about 1,000 people. And so interestingly enough, I think that's what attracts me. That's why I'm attracted to independent schools like this, because they're like small towns. And so yes, there's greater access to other opportunities outside of this community. It feels like where I sort of grew up. But I spent about 14 or 15 years in Houston before I came to Atlanta and Sandy Springs in particular. Part of my educational background is my undergraduate degrees from Texas Tech University, my master's from the University of Houston, and my doctorate's from Baylor. So went to 3 different schools as a part of my experience. But I started out as a teacher. I still really consider myself by trade a teacher. I taught AP American History and loved that. But throughout that period of time of being in Houston, I was asked to be dean of students and a division leader and a development officer, and eventually I ended my time there as head of school. And so I did that for about 4 years before getting this crazy call from right here in Sandy Springs, and I was so compelled by the people that I met that my wife and I moved our family, because we're both from Texas, native Texans, and we decided to move all across the country to settle right here, even as residents. Nice. Here in Sandy Springs.
Very good. So what do you like about, as a resident, what do you like about Sandy Springs? What really attracted you? Because you could live anywhere and still work here, right?
Sure.
But what do you like as a resident? What's most appealing to you?
Yeah, I think what's interesting about just this area of the country, first of all, if I could zoom out for a second, which is the geography, the climate. You get seasonal weather. It feels more year round. Where in Houston, that's a great city too. It's humid, 50 weeks of the year. So you get a little bit of change throughout the year, and that's really nice. I think too that we moved here in 2009. So this is in the midst of the greatest recession of our lifetime, hopefully in our lifetime. And it was a situation where it was just a great time to buy a house and really take our time and look at where we would want our family to grow up and that sort of thing. So I think obviously proximity to the school, just baseline around lifestyle was certainly a key factor to that. But I think that what we have found is that as I've been told, I live in the panhandle of Sandy Springs. I didn't know Texas always had a panhandle. I didn't realize the city of Sandy Springs did. But with that, you really have Sandy Springs is fairly diverse in terms of different that makes up the city in particular. So it just doesn't all fit around this nice little geographic area. It has multiple extensions to it, and with those extensions are different types of opportunities from, parks to the arts to retail and restaurants. I think about even from our school that partners a lot with the corporate community, to have so many Fortune 1000 companies just right near us, and yet we feel like we live in this quiet little neighborhood in the same city.
Yeah.
So the diversity of that, I think, is very attractive to us as a family.
So talk a little more about your some of your partnerships and the organizations, not just private, but that you guys work with to benefit the students here, and that hopefully also benefit the corporations.
Yeah, I think it's important to state our mission first, because it's sort of who we are. It's our true north. It's what we would call our non-negotiable imperative, and really drives everything we do. So our mission statement is simply this sentence: we are a school of inquiry, innovation, and impact. So to have innovation inside your mission statement really is a form of accountability and a high standard for the type of work that you do. And so we like to think that we're an independent school, we're a private school with a public purpose. So a lot of what we talk about is this phrase about designing a better world. So to be a school of inquiry, asking lots of questions, being curious, and allowing our students to pursue those curiosities and passions, to innovate, to think differently about the work of a school, about the work of our students, versus just sitting in a row and regurgitating and then having a mind dump after a test exists, but really closing the gap between what real life looks like and what school life looks like, that there really shouldn't be a gap in between those. And so to have our students really engaged in Sandy Springs in particular, and well beyond that, but in particular Sandy Springs, is a high priority, because school is much more applicable that way, and we can create these real world contexts. We can tap into their curiosity and passion versus just sitting in a classroom where teachers at front of the room and you're in a row memorizing for a test. And so this really connects to this idea of designing a better world, connects to our partnerships that we have in the city and beyond. So, for example, in the high school, in the upper school, our students work with corporations or nonprofits, or even with the city, including an example with the city of Sandy Springs around transportation. And so with that, what these corporate partners or nonprofit partners or even civic partners do for these students is they identify a problem that they're having. And so they complete what we call a design brief. They complete a design brief, and our students actually, through a design thinking method and protocol, help them work through their problem. So in other words, our students work as consultants for these partners. And these are real world projects. These are not adults placating children and saying, hey, you'll feel good, we'll feel good, everybody will feel good, and then they just kind of walk away. So, a number of examples exist, whether it be with AT&T or Porsche North America. Chick-fil-A Innovation Hatch was a recent client in their onboarding toolkit, as well as a current client is with Delta on two particular projects. One about reducing anxiety at the gate for those that struggle with flying, and then another around human trafficking, because we know that this area is a hub for an intersection of human trafficking. So our students are working on things like that. A couple of other projects that speak to that partnership is around the emergence of virtual reality here at the school, and it's become a pretty big deal for us. So Dell has designated Mount Vernon as the virtual reality lab in the country as far as Dell is concerned in the education space.
Wow.
So that's fairly significant. They have pushed our way a ton of technology related to that. Part of what attracted them to Mount Vernon in their subsidiary Alienware was the fact that we're trying to curate content to make an impact. So again, this goes back to our mission of being a school of impact. So, and a great example of that is the Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, right here in the city. And so they've been working with the therapist and the hospital around creating virtual reality experiences to rehabilitate kids with cancer. So virtual reality can make a major impact in the healthcare industry in particular, and our students are living through that. Also, there's another great example with the Center for Civil and Human Rights. The center wanted our students to create a VR exhibit on the latter part of Dr. King's life. And so we partnered with them as a way to do that. So we're hitting all aspects of our community, whether it be the civic environment, the nonprofit community, or even the corporate community as well. So we thrive on these projects because our students are learning what you would learn behind a desk in a row, except they're learning it in a real world context way. So all the math, all the engineering, all the design, all the history, geography, all those dynamics that would exist in a traditional sort of classroom, they're actually learning it in a real world context way. Because this is a school that is actually trying to equip this generation of students. So as a Gen Xer, we're not building a program for my generation or the generations before me. And because technology has become such an accelerator and this world of globalization and the interdependence of that, it has really caused our school to think about doing school differently. Some of it as adults we're familiar with because it's how we went to school, but in many respects it also causes you to think differently about how to do school, because if it's truly about equipping them, this generation, because I always ask the question to our prospective families, tell me what's happening in 2033. And most are puzzled by, I don't know what's going on in 2033. And even as the head of school, I don't know exactly what's going on in 2033. But this is the year in which our preschoolers graduate, this set of preschoolers. So we have to be a school that tries to think that far ahead as a way to backwards design what we're doing if we're truly intentional about equipping this generation of students. And most of that is around a set of skills that are particularly important.
Wow. Yeah. So that's a lot. And that's a fantastic answer. But I think one of the ones that I'd like to kind of dig into a little bit deeper is the one that you mentioned specifically about the city of Sandy Springs with the transportation. Because, I mean, I got goosebumps when you were, especially about Showa. I mean, that's really impactful. And to see that it is multi-pronged, I think that's really, really cool. But as it relates to the city and specifically, I think you guys called it Remove 10, right?
Yeah.
So tell us a little more about that and kind of the nuts and bolts behind that, how that came about, and kind of where that stands today as well.
Yeah. So many of our students in these projects, they are sort of the drivers. They're the initiator, of ideas. It's not dictated by a teacher in terms of the actual project. Now, the teacher is a facilitator and a guide and a shaper of some of those projects. Certainly, like most of Atlanta, but also in particular Sandy Springs, one of the hottest topics one could talk about in Sandy Springs would be around traffic, right? And so while we are very ambitious and audacious as a school and we have these huge goals, I don't think the students set out in this project to say we're going to solve the traffic problem in Sandy Springs. But in many ways, we look at small deposits have a cumulative effect. So this was one project where, what if we could make a dent into this? So they probably started out big as if they were going to solve the traffic problem here in Sandy Springs. But what it boiled down to is to say, hey, let's localize this. What if we, as a school, could remove 10%, of cars off the street during a very busy time of the day during carpool and during those hours, which are similar in most schools across, let's just say, the city of Sandy Springs, public-private schools. What if we could remove 10% of that just from Mount Vernon? What impact could that have?
Right.
And then also, what if we could do that with every public and private school sort of in the city? And so that was sort of the idea behind it, as a way to say, hey, let's localize this for us, let's have a small deposit for it, and then let's try to have an impact going forward. Like with any project in terms of its execution, certainly we've seen more families carpooling, which you can make the assumption that therefore there are a number of cars that are not on the streets, at least during those particular hours. I think there needs to continue to be an ongoing effort and intentional effort related to how to continue to bring other schools into that. So it's not as if they're reluctant to do it. It's around that so many priorities that hit each particular school community, and where do we see what is the highest point of contribution from our community. But again, this is a group of students who met with city officials, who looked at different studies, who began to plot out exactly where every family lived here at the school, and then how could we then move forward as a way of taking an action step around it. So these are type of projects that these students will really remember the rest of their life. And while it's not completely driven by this, it allows for them to be college ready in a way that is somewhat different from their peers across the country, that they've been able to accumulate these different types of experiences that'll actually position them better from a college admission standpoint, which is really remarkable.